Welcome, everyone. This is the third of our very special Crown Society talks, obviously done through Zoom, since we are still all in our homes and in this case, in our respective cities. So I just want to thank you so much for being Crown Society members and for participating in these events. These are part of the wonderful offerings that the Mint gives to you as Crown Society supporters. I don't want to take up too much time because I want us to get right to the dialogue between Ivan and Andre, but I do want to take a moment to remind you all to make sure that you're muted. And then when we get started, if you would just click off your video, that way it won't be distracting off to the side. We'd appreciate it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chandra Johnson, who all of you know, great friend of the Mint, great friend of the arts, great friend of Andre and Ivan, and she's going to do the official introduction. So thank you very much, Chandra.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate it. Hello, everyone. I'm Chandra Johnson. Thank you for joining us and welcome my fellow Mint Museum Crown Society members and other special guests. I'm thrilled about tonight's conversation between two of my friends, André Leon Talley and Ivan Shaw, as they discuss Andre's amazing new memoir, The Chiffon Trenches. Thank you both so much for taking the time to be with all of us. Andre truly needs no introduction as he is a legend in the fashion industry. However, I would love to share just a few of his many accomplishments. Andre served as the fashion news director, creative director, and editor-at-large for U.S. Vogue during his 30-year tenure at the magazine. He has authored 3 books, including 2 memoirs, and has been featured in numerous documentary films about fashion, including The Gospel According to Andre and The First Monday in May. Many of you know him from his visits to Charlotte in 2018 and his wonderful work with the Mint as curator of the Glamour and Romance of Oscar de la Renta exhibition, which delighted thousands of visitors from near and far. We are honored to have him back with us again. And moderating the discussion tonight is the incomparable Ivan Shaw. Ivan has worked as the photography director of US Vogue for 20 years, and in 2016 was named corporate photography director for Condé Nast, where his team works with more than 1 million images. Ivan is responsible for images not only from Vogue, but also from other such iconic publications as Architectural Digest, Vanity Fair, GQ, and The New Yorker. Of course, he and Andre worked together on many projects during their common years in Vogue, and we are looking forward to hearing many details about that. I believe we're going to turn off everybody. I think we're just going to spotlight Andre and Ivan now. And so we have optimal screen image, and we will have time for questions towards the end of the discussion. So please send any you might have to Ivan in the chat feature, and we can do that at the end of the discussion. And with that, I will turn it over to our guest of honor.
Oh, thank you so much, Chandra. It's so great to be here. Thank you, thank Todd, everyone at the Crown Society, and I'm thrilled to be virtually back in Charlotte with all our friends. And thanks for friends from other places who are joining us tonight. Andre, it's great to be here with you. I loved your book. It was an amazing read.
Thank you.
I always start with the cover. I always say, sometimes I judge books by their covers. Now, the title is The Chiffon Trenches. When you started writing, did you think about that immediately? Was you like, I know what I'm going to call this book, or did it come after you wrote the book? I mean, how did you get to that title? Because it's a really fascinating title.
First of all, let me say good evening to you, Ivan. Thank you for moderating this. Thank you, Chandra. Thank you, the Mint Museum and Todd, and to all of the friends in Charlotte who are joining us. To answer your question directly, I had the title in my head before I wrote the book.
Right.
And I came across that about, I was deep into the documentary, The Gospel According to Andre, and I kept thinking, what's my next book? And I had this title in my head, Chiffon Trenches. And what does that mean? It means that fashion is a trench. You win the wars, sometimes you lose, but you're always in the trenches. And chiffon is a very, very exotic and fragile fabric, yet it is very durable. So it sustains itself. If you treat chiffon as it should be treated, it is delicate, ephemeral, emotional. If you put a hard iron on chiffon, it is durable, but it's burned out and it looks awful. And so it means it's a metaphor, if excuse me.
Yeah.
It's a metaphor for surviving in the trenches of fashion.
Yeah. And sometimes people refer to fashion as an armor, right? I mean, we hear about that. Fashion, a woman's armor, when she goes out into the world.
Yeah, I put on my armor. Fashion is my armor. I put on my armor when I present myself to the world. Yeah. And I always have since I started in fashion in 1974 in New York with Andy Warhol. Yeah. And I was wearing Bermuda shorts because that's all I could afford. So I wore my khaki Bermuda shorts because I had good legs, cashmere cable knit socks, Belgian shoes, and perhaps like a beautiful shirt from Turnbull and Astor, or a shirt given to me by Karl Lagerfeld from his own wardrobe from his Goyard trunks.
Wow, fantastic. But you had two, it seems, major influences on your life. Of course, the first one is your grandmother, Binnie Frances Davis, yes. And then later on, Mrs. Vreeland and the Met. And they both had an understanding of luxury, correct?
Yes.
I mean, that's the tie?
Yes. The tie is that my grandmother was the most important woman in my life until I met Mrs. Vreeland. But I already read and knew everything about Mrs. Vreeland. But when I met her and we became close friends, she was my mentor. But eventually our friendship evolved into a close friendship where I would go to her house for dinner alone. Wow. And that's like having dinner with the Duchess of Windsor or the Queen. Yeah. And that I would sit, and eventually it evolved over years into, once she was losing her sight, I would go read to her.
Really?
So on Friday night, I'd go read to her. We would have dinner, then we'd retire to the salon, and I would read out loud to her. I read the entire book, Queen Marie of Romania, by Hannah Pakula, to her. She loved my voice. So she loved nothing more than sitting back in a little dwarf chair with a cigarette and a little timbal of vodka, Russian vodka, of course, pure, chilled, and listening to me read. I read Baron de Rothschild's memoirs. I'd read magazine articles. I'd read just anything we wanted to read at that certain time to keep her current. And she loved that. So Mrs. Vreeland and my grandmother had they were similar in taste and mood. Mrs. Vreeland understood luxury. My grandma was a domestic maid all her life. But I realized they were the same people.
That's amazing.
My grandmother used to pack, when we would come to New York, she had Samsonite luggage, laminated Samsonite luggage, but she'd have tissue paper in between each layer of clothing. One side of the suitcase was mine when I was a child, the other side were for her clothes. Right. And I'd watch her put the tissue paper in the linings of in between the layers of clothes. I used to go to Mrs. Vreeland's house on Saturday afternoon when she was packing to go to Europe for the couture collections. And I remember once I was at Mrs. Vreeland's house on a Saturday. I went in the afternoon, and it was an army of assistants, maids, whatever you call them, women, running around packing these Vuitton hard cases. And they were delicately putting the tissue paper. The tissue was bought, at Woolworths, the 5 and dime, the white tissue paper. So packing, they had the same approach that luxury was maintenance. Maintenance was everything. My grandmother believed in me waxing the floors with Johnson's paste wax on my knees and on my hands and elbows. Mrs. Vreeland believed in wax, polish, shine. Maintenance was as close to perfection as anything. Mrs. Vreeland believed in polishing the soles of her shoes. I don't know why she polished the soles of her shoes with a rhinoceros horn, but she did. It's not a myth. She polished the soles of her shoes.
Really did.
With a rhinoceros horn. She didn't, but Iman, the maid, did.
Yeah, of course.
Then she had a young man, a very handsome young man of sort of European descent, who worked at the Met, who would come up on Saturday afternoons and go over every spine of her book in the hall of her library, her shelves. And he would dust them gingerly. He would take one book out and dust it, put it back, another and dust it, dusting the outer spine of the book. So these things mattered to Mrs. Vreeland. Mrs. Vreeland lacquered her Vuitton suitcases with shellac. Well, I had to do the same thing. So when I would go to England with Manolo Blahnik, I would sit in his larder in his house in Bath, and I would get yacht varnish and lacquer Vuitton and have one coat dry, 2 coats, 3 coats, 4 coats. And so my luggage was shiny like Mrs. Vreeland's.
Right. But beneath that, there's this idea of really respecting the things.
And discipline, and appreciation.
Appreciation, exactly. But you end up going to Brown, this very prestigious university.
Yes. And I had a scholarship.
Yeah, sorry?
I had a scholarship.
Scholarship. And you get a master's in French literature in 1972.
Yes.
Your plan, you write a piece, your thesis is on the influence of Black women on Charles Baudelaire, correct?
Yes.
And you're planning on teaching, a very academic life, correct?
Yes.
Did you really Did you believe for a moment you were going to spend your career in academia and
Well,
Ivy League?
I thought that that was the trajectory until I was told by the late Richard Merkin, an artist, a professor at RISD, you better go to New York because you belong in New York. And so he was like a friend. And by the way, a friend of his gave me my first piece of Vuitton. I still have it in North Carolina. It just gave me a piece of Vuitton luggage like that. And he said, go to New York because this is what's going to happen for you. And so in 1974, October, I came to New York for the Cody Award.
Right.
And that was my birthday treat. And I came and I met Carrie Donovan. I met Elsa Peretti, Joe Eula, Halston, Potassa, the drag queen, Andy Warhol. And I went back to Brown. I packed another case and came back to New York and decided to go and be an intern, a volunteer at Mrs. Vreeland's Costume Institute, where I worked with Tanya Goodman. We were two great volunteers. So we say we graduated from the Vreeland School of Fashion.
Yeah. And that must have been so much fun. I mean, the exhibitions were amazing. Tanya's talked to me about it. I mean,
great fun. Oh, great fun. Mrs. Vreeland, we waited behind columns. I used to hide. They would say, Mrs. Vreeland, the office would come out and say to the volunteers, Mrs. Vreeland has entered the museum. Well, we know the office is in the basement. So from the Fifth Avenue entrance down to the basement is a big walk. That's a bit of a trek. Right. Mrs. Vreeland has entered the museum now. They're called from the reception area. And everyone would just get like soldiers. And I would hide behind columns to see her walk in because her walk was legendary. And she walked on her tiptoes and she had all the rouge and the Saint Laurent pea jacket and the whole drama, the dramatics of her entrance to her office.
Right.
And we would sit there and I'd hide behind the columns and I had something someone had given me to do. And I did it properly. It was a Lana Turner costume from The Prodigal. And it was like a Paco Rabanne swimsuit with fringe. It was in a box. Someone had given it to me technically to do. And I realized I had to take the pliers and put this thing together. It came from Hollywood. It was a show with Hollywood Design.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Vreeland saw it and she walked by and I watched as she walked by. I was hiding. I had not yet met her. And 5 minutes later, I get a call. Mrs. Vreeland will see you now.
Right.
And that was the first time I ever went into Mrs. Vreeland's office.
Wow. Were you terrified?
No, I thank God that day I had on my best yellow cashmere sweater.
Of course.
And navy blue wool trousers.
Right.
And I went into the office and I was very tall and skinny. And I guess I was good looking, but whatever.
You were.
And I just, I wasn't nervous. And I stood there. And I could see, because I was tall, over her desk, a huge legal pad, and she'd written, André, accent, the helper. And she says, now, what is your name? André. Now, she stood up and she says, you will stand by my side throughout the completion of this show. And that was 6 weeks into the opening. And then I realized my life had been changed forever.
It's those moments in your life. I mean, if you had to distill, are there a few things that you learned from her? If you had to kind of distill it down, I'm sure there's a lot, but is there a couple of key things that you think back and you think, this is what I learned from her most?
Never become bored. Always be curious and be inquisitive. Love to learn, love literature, love knowledge. And she taught me how to look at clothes from inside out. Mrs. Vreeland always had a narrative about one dress. It was either who designed it, when they designed it, who wore it, where did they wear it, why did they pick it, and who were the people. In other words, if you're Claudette Colbert and you're wearing gold tissue lame in 1938 or 33, you're in Cleopatra, the black and white version, and it's a gold bias cut dress by Adrian or somebody. Right. If you're the Empress of Austria, you've got a waist like this and you're wearing black, but you exercise. You have to know the background of the people who wear the dresses. The people who wear the dresses are as important as the dress itself. That's what I learned. That's what made my career, because I went to Women's Wear Daily from Andy Warhol. I went straight into Women's Wear.
I want to ask.
And I became the upcoming, I was a Mia-Rite. I just went to the top. I shot to the top.
Yeah, you did. But I mean, and this is really important for us to understand. So 1972, you finished your thesis. By 1975, you're the Paris bureau chief of Women's Wear Daily. But right before, in between, I want to get to this. Mrs. Vreeland introduces you to somebody very important, and that is Andy Warhol.
Yes.
And that's a major thing. And you end up as the receptionist at Interview, correct? For $50 a week. And so tell me, what's that like? I mean, this is really interesting. You're with Andy Warhol, one of the great artists of the 20th century, the factory essentially, right?
Yeah.
And
Well, I'll tell you what it was like.
how did Andy influence you? What was that like?
First of all, I had to get up and go to work at 12 o'clock. I left work at 7 with Andy Warhol. I went to work. I was making little money, but I was in the right crowd. I was doing it with the in crowd, the inner sanctum. So I saw everything that happened at the factory in, say, from January 75 to August. I saw Princess Caroline of Monaco, Grace Jones, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sal Schlumberger, et cetera, et cetera. But the working with Andy was extraordinary because he saw the world like a child through the kaleidoscope of a child's eye. And so it was discipline. I used to take all the messages of Fran Lebowitz, and she and I still remain friends, but she was a tough one. Oh boy, was she tough. She was intimidating. And I had to be perfect. Her messages I could not make a mistake. And she says I was the only person that took the messages properly because Andy loved the socialites. Fred Hughes used to hire all the English socialites.
Yeah.
The English Debs and all of that would come work for the factory for nothing. And they'd come to work whenever they wanted to. They'd be out partying all night. They'd come at 2 or 3. They didn't care. But I took my job seriously. And I used to go lick the stamps. I had to recalibrate the stamp machine at the post office because, back in those days, you had a machine that you could, send out the postage and you didn't have to put stamps.
Right.
I used to go pick up Andy's lunch every day at Brownie's, the organic food shop around the corner. But I also met the people who came into the factory. So I always saw Mrs. Vreeland coming in with guests, and she would come and say hello. And then Andy would one day said to me, gee, Andre, oh, I just think that you should have your private parts, a portrait of your private parts. And I said, what? Thank you, no thank you. I kept thinking, well, Victor Hugo is doing it. I said, well, no thank you,
exactly.
Andy, no thank you. I just kept saying, no thank you. And in my mind, the back of my mind was, well, I'll give you the portrait and you'll be rich. And I said, no thank you. I kept thinking, if I did this, my grandma would read it some paper. André Leon Talley has his private parts painted by Andy Warhol, and she would have a heart attack and die. I never did.
Your fault, right? But I think there's an interesting thing here that I think then carries on throughout your career and your life, and it's, for lack of a better term, it's kind of this mix of uptown and downtown, and you've always been able to traverse the two so well.
Yeah.
There are people in sort of kind of very New York centric idea of the Upper East Side and then downtown is Soho. But I think that's kind of in the world. I think you can kind of extrapolate out. And you've always been able to traverse. You can be up in Harlem, you could at the Abyssinian Church, you could be at the Couture. I mean, that's something I think, does it start there and that kind of being at the Met and then being with the—
Yeah, it started with Andy. It started with Andy and Mrs. Vreeland, because in the 70s, New York was a different place. It's no longer that way anymore. Right. In the 70s, everyone was in the in crowd. Everyone was on the A list. Studio 54 liberated everyone. Deanna Vreeland went to Studio 54. Truman Capote went to Studio 54. CC Guest went to Studio 54. The De La Rentas went to 54, as well as the drag queens. So John Richardson. And I was there every night with Paloma Picasso, Dion von Furstenberg. So it was a liberating time. And Andy helped to create that kind of atmosphere of liberated freedom of a culture. People, Francoise Laurenti gave a sit-down dinner in the factory for like 90 people. It was the dinner of the season.
Right. And it's in a rough factory downtown, right?
It was downtown on Broadway, 860 Broadway.
60 Broadway.
But she was a thinker. She was thought outside the box.
Yeah.
She mixed, and I was lucky. And I was lucky to have friends like Francoise and Oscar. I was lucky to just be able to meet Karl Lagerfeld, and just he and I became like surrogate brothers, missing at birth. Yeah. But the most important person was Diana Vreeland.
Diana. I mean, everything changes after Diana. Amazing. That's the horse portrait, I think, or Jonathan Becker's portrait. Yeah, wonderful. But this, so let's, there, you've got it right there. But so here, this is 1975 is really important. There's all this stuff going on in New York and Andy Warhol, and it's this amazing moment. But you end up in Paris, and you're working for Women's Wear Daily under the legendary John Fairchild, not an easy boss, no. Yeah. But you end up in Paris during this extraordinary period. There was even a book about it, The Beautiful Fall, correct? You've got Karl Lagerfeld and you've got Yves Saint Laurent. They're two camps. From what I've read, Cafe Flore is kind of like ground zero for the fashion world there. There's two tables, right? Karl's table and Yves' table, and the two groups.
No. That was La Coupole.
La Coupole, okay.
There were two tables. That was a great restaurant in Montparnasse.
Okay.
And you went downstairs after you had dinner, did the tango and stuff.
Wow.
It was a fabulous restaurant. So you'd walk in on my first night in Paris. Carl had organized a dinner for me with all of his friends and Jacques Debauché and all of his models. And across the aisle was Betty Catrou, Yves Saint Laurent, Lulu La Falaise, and Eric de Rothschild. Wow. So it was the war of the Saint Laurents and the Lagerfelds. And they had been friends once, and then they had a huge falling out. Right. And over a romantic falling out over a certain man named Jacques. But I managed to navigate both of the courts. So I was managed to move freely in both courts because I had the position of women's wear. So I had to cover Saint Laurent couture as well as the rising genius of Karl Lagerfeld, who was then at Chloe, who later became the creative director at Chanel in 1983. Right. And we became friends at 70 before I got to Paris in New York. Yeah. In 75. And so when I got to Paris in 78, I remember people at Women's Wear Daily kept saying, what does Andre and Karl Lagerfeld have in common? Why is Karl Lagerfeld writing to him? You know, the senior editors could not understand what he and I had in common. Well, we had a lot in common. We had we had the passion for knowledge, we had a thirst for luxury, and we just could converse on anything. And I listened, and Karl understood that. And he was a very important teacher for me. I learned so much about the 18th century. I learned about how important the Marquise, the Madame de Dubarry was, and the Dame de Pompadour, and all this. And we used to get on the phone and talk about Nancy Mitford and her great books on the Frederick the Great, et cetera, Catherine the Great, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So we had an ongoing friendship for a very, very long time based on our passions for history and the history of style. Yeah. And that got me over in Paris, because when I got to Paris with Mr. Fairchild, don't think it wasn't his head that he knew already I was friends with Karl Lagerfeld, okay? Right. So I had access, and I was also friends with the Saint Laurent crowd, Betty and Lulu. So he knew I could get right in there with Lulu and Betty and Eve and get the scoop.
Right. I mean, do you think when they write sort of the history of the last 30 years of the 20th century, is it Karl and Eve? I mean, is that really when you want to understand fashion, 1970?
At that point, yes. It was Karl and Eve. Eve was arguably the most extraordinary designer of the 20th century. And then as Karl emerged by 1983, he was at Chanel. He ended up being the most significant, although Eve died at around 2008. But they both had such immense talent. You know, they got the prize in 54. Sure. When they got the prix de something. Yeah. Karl for a coat, Eve for a dress. Yeah. And they became friends. So they were the hip hop artists of couture at the time.
Do you think Karl is the more influential overall, or Eve's more influential?
Eve is
more influential.
Eve, because of what all he did, the contributions. Right. Eve contributed the pantsuit, the trouser suit, ever evolving from his first trouser suit in 1966. Eve did transparency. Eve did the romantic gypsy. Eve had such, you can put post-its on the major influences that Eve did that are still very important in fashion, and people are very inspired by Eve. They're still inspired by Karl, but Eve had that innate genius. He became something, excuse me, sorry.
Take your time.
Eve just had something that was magical.
Right.
Karl worked hard, and he was a genius, but Eve just seemed to, the fabric spoke to Eve. If you saw Eve in front of a bow, tying a bow on a model in the studio, it was a religious experience between Eve and his hands. Wow. It was en tremblant, the hands going to that bow, tying that bow personally. Only two people I ever saw do that were Eve and Oscar. The bow was a moment of, it was like a Catholic mass, a Catholic, you know, when they take the wafers and stuff. Yeah. Where you go when you go to church?
I think I'm not Catholic, but I think it's communion. Well, probably wrong about that. But no, they're a huge influence. And so they both had this enormous impact on you, but you ended up coming back to New York eventually. And I thought it'd be fun. Let's look at the Vogue years a little bit. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share screen, everyone. Here we go. Hopefully I'll get this right. There we go. All right. Okay, we're there. Andre, can everyone see? Andre, you can see?
Yeah, I can see.
We have the cover. So you come back to New York.
Oh my goodness!
And you end up.
What research you have?
What's that?
What great photographs.
Like, well, I should, right? I'm the guy who should have.
Oh my God.
But these are wonderful. You both look so chic. When did you first meet Anna?
Well, I first met Anna when I came up to Vogue to be introduced by Grace, to be interviewed by Grace Mirabella, who had not hired me when I was introduced to Vogue when I left Women's Wear Daily in Paris and I came to New York to meet her in January 1980. And she was very snobbish to me and
Really?
kind of impolite, but polite. And I said, well, I'm not going to get this job. Mr. Lieberman had said, go down and if you convince Grace, you'll be hired. Well, I didn't convince Grace. But later, someone showed a video that I'd done with Arthur L. Gorge in the back of a car with Karl Lagerfeld. And that sort of convinced us. So I went up to interview her, and I formally met Anna then. And this is a picture of her on the left, the black dress.
Yeah, that's early.
It's a dress I selected for her by Jeffrey Bean. And it is a belle de jour. It's like the prime Mrs. G wrote it, a school mistress dress. And look how young she is there. Look how young I am.
I found it.
My feet. Just look how young I am.
That's great. You both look great. I mean, it's early 80s. I think I should have jotted down.
Yes, and then and here we are. I had just come back from the rehab sent by Anna Winter to the Duke Dining Fitness Center, where I'd lost 55 pounds on the right. Right. That's why I'm standing there with that Balenciaga cape and the Rose Revere shoes. And Anna's very proud because she had intervened and I'd gone to the Duke and Dining Fitness Center and lost 55 pounds. Of course, I gained it all back because I was not at the center. But I was very proud showing myself off. And that was about 2004, 2005 or something.
Yeah, exactly. But they're wonderful pictures.
I love the picture. Oh my God. It's not even the same Anna Winter. It's like,
I know.
It's almost like, it's just a compliment. Who is the lady? Well, I'll come back. That's beautiful. You did great research. I love that picture.
Thank you. I'm honored. All right, let's look at some of the work that you did at Vogue and we can kind of talk about it. I know this was an important story for you. Anne Bass was Tell me about Anne. Tell me about the house. Tell us about
Oh my God, Anne Bass was great. Anne Bass had come to New York and she wanted to conquer New York. And I was the sittings editor for the house. I didn't write the story.
Right.
And Anne at this point is very standoffish. I think we just become at Vogue. I was creative director. And Anna assigned me.
Oops, a little interruption. I think we're okay now.
Okay. Anna had assigned me to.
Hold on. Can everyone make sure they're muted? I think somebody may not be muted.
Yeah, somebody's not muted.
All right, there we go. All right.
So Anne was originally from Fort Worth. She was married to the billionaire Sid Bass. Sure. And they had the most stock in Disneyland. And I think at that point, Anne had been dressed a lot by Stasi, and she was moving into Ungaro. And I was told that some editor had gone to her house in Fort Worth, which is a beautiful house. I think it's called Rudolph. And the editor flew down for the day, and they said Anne Harley offered the Vogue editor a glass of water. So by the time I got to this great house story, where she just moved to New York and had her house done by Mark Hampton, the decor is still there, the sculpture is still there, the Valbracht is still there. Oh, now you moved to Madonna. I got to finish Anne Bass story. Anne Bass. So Anne Bass, who died on May, I think this spring, we were great friends, and Hamish so beautifully opened his tribute to her with a quote from me. We've been being great friends, and I still think of her every day. And she had the most extraordinary couture wardrobe. I mean, Anne has like 30 Chanels, 30 Saint Laurents, 40 Valentinos, you name it. Her wardrobe is a walking encyclopedia of contemporary couture.
Amazing.
And that's a beautiful. Is that Rodin?
Yeah, I think.
Is that the sculptor?
Yeah, that's a good.
I think it's Rodin, isn't it? Yeah.
Degas.
And it's got the original tutu in crinoline. And it looks onto the painting of the Baltus, which I love.
And I have a little goof with the slides, and there's a picture of the living room a little farther along in the slideshow.
Okay.
It's my mistake. I did a last minute change. But let's keep going. Madonna, of course, with Patrick, and this is 1989 with popcorn, no? And so
Madonna, I was sent by Anna from Paris with a suitcase of couture clothes. You got to leave Paris and go straight to Los Angeles with trunks and trunks of couture clothes. Saint Laurent, Chanel, Lacroix. And I threw in one dress from the late Patrick Kelly, the African-American designer, who was then doing ready-to-wear and lived in Paris. And this is a Patrick Kelly dress. So I had these trunks of Saint Laurent couture, Christian Lacroix couture. And she said, I want to wear the Patrick Kelly. And look how athletic she is. And look how she has not yet gone into platinum blonde a la Jean Harlow. But this is her house. This is actually not a set. This was her house in Los Angeles at the time when she was married to Sean, what's his name? Penn?
Sean Penn, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we got along very well. And this was a day shoot. I was kind of intimidated by her. It's the first time I'd actually met her.
It's kind of scary. I love intimidating.
Yeah, it was very intimidating.
Yeah.
It was very intimidating. I say, but she wanted to eat the popcorn. She said, I want to, she wanted to break the mold of the elegance of that house. You see?
Yeah.
That, and you had to let her go with it. As I said, a part of an editor at a sitting is to be like an airline steward.
I love it.
Coffee, tea, or me. What may I get you, ma'am? How can I make you feel more comfortable?
I love it. I love it. So that's it. Hold on. Let's see. Okay, so this next one, Iman, of course, and this is also 1989, and it's with Helmut Newton.
This is Iman saying, my farewell to fashion, I'm going to retire. Well, we knew she never really retired. But
right,
this is so inspiring because I don't know if you have the nude of her. Did you have the nude of her?
I do. Hold on. Let's see.
Because
there we go.
This is a nude of her. This is a Chanel couture jacket from 1989, Manolo shoes, and her own blue jeans and no shirt. And these are Saint Laurent Lame boots. This is my own antique rug over the sofa in Karl Lagerfeld's chateau in Monaco was the setting. And Helmut Newton did the photographs, and Helmut was brilliant. And to get Iman to pose for that nude picture with those Saint Laurent earrings and the glasses. And that was, and look, there's a Paloma Picasso bag. All the furniture is Carl's furniture collected by Carl. This is not a set. And this is an extraordinary shoot. And Iman said, I'm going to announce my retirement. And this is what we came up with. And then, the high and low is just what you talk about, Ivan. We mixed the high, the Chanel jacket, with the low, her own jeans.
Yeah.
The Manolo Blahnik Columbia. And by the way, Ann Bass owns this jacket. I just saw it recently.
Really? It still exists. I just moderated a panel discussion with Iman last night. She's still stunning and amazing. But this is really, this is the 80s. Anna's first cover, November 88 is the high and low. This kind of personifies that.
Absolutely. Anna started that, and that's how we got to that point. We could then mix that in Vogue. Before that cover with the girl, what was it, the Israeli model, when she wore the bar jacket with the cross? No one ever thought of doing that.
Right. Yeah. It was revolutionary. When they did that cover, the story is Anna's first cover, they sent it to the printer, and the printer called up and said, I think you sent us the wrong photograph.
You made a mistake.
So radical. There was a mistake. They didn't believe it. And Iman has really become this kind of cultural icon and a person of philanthropy and really, pushing change and diversity.
Very beautiful and very daring.
Okay, so this is my mistake. I apologize, everyone. This is Ann Bass's living room. I was moving things around at the last minute, and this is what happened. So just to quickly flip back.
But there are two Rothkos. Those are Rothkos. The decor is by Mark Hampton. He also came from Indiana. Anna was originally from Indiana. Beautiful sofas and beautiful Axminster rug. And it was a house that was just we spent about 3 days there. And there's Picasso's in the library, and there are Degas in the bedroom. And so one day at the end of the shoot, Anne found me on the kitchen floor sitting with my assistants and the photographer. And she walked in at 6:30. And with her staff, she says, why are you all sitting here on my kitchen floor? I said, we didn't know where else to sit. We having pizza. We're hungry because we didn't want to mess up your living room. Yeah. But we became close friends from that shoot. Amazing. We became very close friends.
Amazing. It's a great story.
The house still looks like that. Oh, that's one of my favorite shoots.
All right, here we go. Sorry, I'm not toggling very well tonight. So this is a really important shoot. And this is Helmut Newton, 1991 with Cindy Crawford. Helmut would have just celebrated his 100th birthday on October 31st. A huge influence on me. Let's talk about the shoot. Let's talk about Helmut, your relationship with him and his influence.
Helmut was wonderful, but without Helmut, there would be no June. June was magnificent. His wife, at Alice Springs. And they were in love. And when you went to a shoot in Monte Carlo with Helmut, this is where this was taken. You had to also have dinner with Helmut in June. You had to dip into that lifestyle, and you had to go. You could say, I'm tired, I'm going to bed. You had to get off that plane and go up to their apartment for dinner. It might be end at 3 o'clock. Just go. And he would tell you what he wanted to shoot. And then he would spend 9, what do you call the film?
Frames.
9 frames, and he'd have it. This is Cindy Crawford in a swimsuit, and she is a widow, and she's left her husband's funeral in a swimsuit and a veil. That's what it's supposed to be. It's a fantasy. Yeah. And she's left the funeral, and it's hot. She is wearing her Manolo Blahnik stilettos in every picture, but she's on her way to the bank to figure out how much money she has. She just left the funeral and had a dip in the pool. This was a fantasy. And then Helmut had this idea that he got this from some famous book in Germany he read in the 30s, where Cindy would be on the floor in front of this blind orchestra, which I found very poetic and romantic and beautiful. Notice how sexy Cindy is in that photograph.
Right, amazing. But there's a sense of precision, right, with Helmet. And you talked about
Helmut
the
knew
mind frame,
always what he
right?
wanted to do. You had to work with in Helmut's mindset. And
Right.
you did it with love and you did it with great respect. And
But
that
you
was
all,
one of my favorite shoots.
yeah, but you also, I think, shared that with him, a sense, that sense of precision. And you talked
Yes,
about maintenance earlier, and this idea of
yes.
knowing what you want to
Yeah.
do, going right, just that sort of laser focus. which
And
is
you did
so
not
great.
argue with Helmut. He was the master. You didn't say, Helmut, I think that's a bad idea. I would have never said to him,
Yeah.
that's a bad idea. But when I
But
got that veil and I said, let's do Cindy in a black swimsuit. The story was to show swimsuits. I said, let's show her in high heels, walking in some grand setting. And she's just been to the funeral and she's got to go to the bank and count the money, but she's still a widow. He said, oh yeah, I love that.
It's very Helmet. Okay, we're gonna go. So very different beat. This is Arthur Elgord, 1992. Cindy Crawford again, with Ed Harris and Richard Grant. Tell us about this. How did this all come about?
Anna sent me to photograph Cindy Crawford in Armani. This was an Armani ball gown.
Yeah.
And Ed Harris and Mr. Grant, they wear
Yeah.
white tie and no shoes. And they're playing croquet. This is a precursor to like a spoof on English aristocrats or something,
Right.
but they're happy. It's a spoof, but it's fun. And
Yeah.
when this photograph appeared, I was so proud because someone came to me and said they had 88% from the readers and subscribers of Vogue.
Right.
88% of people love this spread.
Yeah.
And by the way, when we did this spread, Cindy loved it and Richard loved it. This man, Mr. Harris, didn't understand why he had to have his shoes off.
It made the picture. Made the picture.
And a cigarette.
You know, but so interesting talking about an Armani dress. Where does Giorgio Armani fit in sort of juxtaposition to Carl and Eve? I mean, it's a very different aesthetic.
It's a very different aesthetic, but he still has his place on the top because he still survived. He still is Armani Privé. It's still a very important brand. Those red carpet ladies love Armani Privé.
Yeah.
All of them, from Lady Gaga on to whoever, you'll see. What's her name? What's the lady's name?
Which
The
one?
beautiful blonde, the blonde in Carol. What's her name? Carol. Come on. Ivan, help me.
I know. I'm not. I'll think of it when you know. an
Carol,
hour
the
from
movie
now.
star. Someone send him the answer.
Oh, Kate Blanchett.
Yeah,
no.
Kate Blanchett loves Armani
Okay,
Privé.
got it.
So he's still very, very valid, and he's a very nice man, and he has culture. And I often had wonderful times with him in Milan. And I went to his house, his country house,
Yeah.
when Steve Radziwill was working with him. So we had a good time. But I love this shoot because everything is perfect. To the center, it started out by Arthur. Look at that hedge behind Ed. It's all so left page, right page. It's beautiful.
And
Great
Arthur,
Arthur.
this amazing ability. He's just kind of easily shooting everything, and he's getting these moments that nobody else gets. Right?
Arthur got it, and Arthur got the cigarette. It's just like, it's like one of those great Hollywood shots of Gary Cooper with a white tie.
Yeah.
And it's very Hollywood, very like a Hollywood moment.
Yeah, and he's very fast. He was very fast. Let's keep. So Naomi, who's a huge presence was Forces of Fashion. Vogue's Forces of Fashion just ended today.
Yes.
Naomi was the star of that, I think, in many ways.
I'm sure she was. She's just been on your cover for the November issue.
Yeah. So you did this with Helmut Newton in 1999. And
Well-
Naomi is, well, I'll let you talk about it, and we can talk about Naomi too.
Well, Naomi said that this was her James Bond moment. So Helmut decided to shoot her as that girl in James Bond who comes up out of the water with a scuba diving suit. There's a picture like that. But look how great Naomi's body is. And this is 1999.
Yeah.
And the athleticism of her body and her professionalism. Helmut was reluctant to shoot Naomi, but I think Anna convinced him he could do it.
Right. Right.
And he had a great time.
Yeah, I'm sure. I would think they would be great together. They would.
Oh, yes. And Naomi, if you give her the moment, she rises further. She rises the whole situation to the next level. And this was a great shoot. And I think that you couldn't show a dress like that, the way it slashed down the leg, no better than you can here. And Helmut got it right away.
Yeah.
We
And
never had a moment of tension on that shoot at all.
Right. And we don't really see pictures like this anymore. No.
Never. And you don't see pictures because Helmut, I am the editor on the shoot, but Helmut has picked the shoes.
Exactly.
I had the shoes, but he decided, I want that shoe. He doesn't want any shoe but the one he wants. And that responds to his aesthetics about shoes. You see, it's plastic with high heels. It's all sex.
Exactly. Exactly.
And she's on her cell phone. Remember, she's known for herself. How many cell phones does she have? 3. And Naomi, I've seen Naomi. I've been on a plane with Naomi from Brazil somewhere in Rio de Janeiro.
Yeah.
And she got in first class. She had a Ziploc bag with 9 cell phones. I said, Naomi, what do you want with 9 cell phones? 1 for each country. And in that Ziploc bag was also hot sauce. I said, what is the hot sauce for this? It wars off the coals.
Oh my God. I love it. I love it. Well, it's probably worth, I mean, she's having a real renaissance now to this.
She is, and that cover was a great renaissance that Anna just published. I love that cover. And I'm glad that she was in the summit, and she's turned her whole life around. She is an advocate for all causes. She's on the board of Gucci. She is an advocate for fashion in Africa. And, you know, she's done so much for hurricane relief, AIDS relief, everything.
Yeah, real transformation and real icon for, I think, a lot of young women.
Icon status now, iconic.
Iconic. And so this shoot, and we talked about it a little bit, we were emailing, this was an important, this is again, another, for me, this year, well, I'd like to talk about John Galliano, and I want to thank you when we talk about this. When you brought John Galliano into Vogue at early, I think mid 90s, maybe 95, 96.
94.
And one of the reasons why I've always admired you so much is that I was standing there, I was the photo editor, and you came down the hallway with John, and I was standing there, and you introduced me to John.
Yeah,
and I want to thank you for that, because that was a huge moment in my life. And the fact that you had it was such a beautiful moment, and the integrity of it. I was not the most important person on that hallway at that moment, Hamish, Anna, but you introduced us, and I got to meet John Galliano. Yeah. So thank you for that. I think it says so much about you as a person. But
John, thank you, Ivan. Thank you for that great memory. And John Galliano is the poet of couture. He is the symbolist poet. He is the Charles Baudelaire. He is the Paul Valéry, the Stéphane Mallarmé. And look how great his body was there. Look,
he was in good shape, right?
And he purposely came to the shoot. This is an Arthur Elgort couture shoot. And this is a John Galliano couture outfit. Can you believe that's couture?
Couture.
But he had changed couture at Dior. He just revolutionized couture. And so Arthur had this idea, and there's Renee looking like, I don't know what. And there's John half naked, and it's January.
Yeah.
And it's a great photo. And I love the picture.
It was amazing. And yeah, sorry, I should have sort of segued saying that this is a story with Renee Zellweger.
That's his young Renee Zellweger. Yeah. The last moment we saw with Renee, she won the Oscar for Best Actress for Judy.
But John is this huge force, right? In the early 2000s.
Well, John became this huge force because we, Vogue, I take credit, but I also thank Anna because she allowed me, as living in Paris, to resuscitate and take John off of a ventilator, metaphorically, I'm sorry to say.
Right.
Because his partner had just bombed out. John had no money, and I found a backer for him to give his comeback ready-to-wear show in March of 1994. Amazing. And it was orchestrated by me and Amanda Harlick in the house of the late Sarah Schlumberger. Right. And it was 17 looks, and the girls did it for free. Linda, Christy, Naomi, Kate. And the jewels came from all the jewelers in Paris, free on loan. Hats free, shoes by Manolo Blahnik. And it was a legendary fashion show. There were two shows, one at 9:30 in the morning and one at 11:30. And of course, Anna came to the 11:30 one in a spiffing new Chanel couture suit. And of course, Anna had, special seating in the house and everything. Right. And from that show, he got the job as Givenchy for about a year, couture. And then he went on to be the creative director, the first English creative director of the House of Dior.
Right. But there's this sort of juxtaposition that's been written about a lot of John against Alexander McQueen, in a sense. It's not unlike Eve and Carl, no?
Yes.
I mean, this is the 90s version or the early 2000s version?
Yeah, but John and Alexander did not know each other like Carl and Eve.
Right.
But they did create that. But I must say that I gravitated towards John because I understood his vision more than Alexander. Alexander did not talk much. John could elaborate and articulate his vision. It was, as Mrs. Reeland taught me, a narrative behind every collection. John started with a narrative written in Wales by Amanda Harlick. Before he did a collection, he had Amanda write him a handwritten thesis about what the collection would be. Really? And then he would take that story and make a collection. And these collections were extraordinary.
Extraordinary. I mean, in that show, that first show that John did, and I know there was an Eve show, I think the Russian show, correct me if I'm wrong. There are maybe a couple of the key fashion shows in the history of the runway, right? There's a couple of shows that when we look back, those are the ones that we're going to remember. Well,
you got to remember the Saint Laurent show of the Saint Laurent Ballet Russe show, the Russian opera show, 1978. John Galliano's 1994. This is the comeback collection at Sarah Schlumberger's house. One can find it on YouTube, where he merged the Japanese influence with modernist constructions of clothes, of French European clothing. And then you're going to have the wonderful beginning of Karl Lagerfeld in '83, January at Chanel.
So that's kind of three moments.
For me, those are three moments.
This is, let's see, hold on.
This is a great photograph.
There we go. So talking about Carl, Carl and Renee. And so what was this like? I mean,
It was just magical. This was it was January. The couture just happened. It was magical. There's Renee, I think, on Chanel in front of a Ferris wheel. This is Arthur's idea. And then we just bought Paris, like Emily in Paris, postcards of Paris. And this Carl had his own bookstore. And we wanted a portrait of Carl, and we had a portrait of each designer, Tom Ford also. Tom Ford was photographed at Voltaire restaurant. And Renee has on a Chanel suit and little Manolo Blahnik sleeves. And that's her own Hermes bag she bought for herself at a vintage store in California. And she paid $10,000 for it. And she wanted me to say, is this a fake bag or a real bag? And I took her to Hermes, to Monsieur Tessier, my salesman at Hermes, the man that took care of all my purchases. Well, you know, and back in the day, I had layaway at Hermes. I was one of the few people that had layaway. I'd go buy stuff and I would pay for it on installment. And I walked in with Madame Renee and I said, Mr. Tessier, this is Mrs. Ellwager. She's just won the Golden Globes for Nurse Betty or something, I can't remember. I said, we want you to authenticate this bag. She just bought it as a present for herself for getting the Golden Globe. And he said, he looked at it, he took it downstairs. He came back 20 minutes later, he said, this is a rare vintage Hermes bag. This is rare because the skins are Louisiana alligator. We don't even get skins like this anymore. So she was thrilled.
Yeah, it would have been very awkward had it not been, no? I mean,
oh, it would have been awkward for poor Renee who spent $10,000 on it.
$1,000, that would have been.
Because that bag would have cost her $100,000 at Hermes back in the day. If that had been alligator, it would have cost her $100 grand. She paid 10.
Wow. Amazing. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing so we can talk a little bit more. We've talked about all these amazing designers and models and Iman and Renee. So much has happened over the last couple of years. I mean, where do you sort of see fashion? How do you feel about what's happening right now in terms of fashion? Where do you see it going? Are there designers you are particularly fond of right now? Just kind of where's your head at right now in terms of what's happening?
Well, I'm very fond of Laquan Smith. I think he did a dress for Lizzo. Did he not? On the Lizzo shoot. I think he did.
So, yes.
I think he did. I mentored him, and he self-taught. He was raised by his grandmother. He didn't have money. He made patterns out of the New York Times newspaper. He's self-taught, and he's sort of a genius. He's struggling, but he's rising. Tom Ford wanted to hire him, but then he said, no, I want to do my own thing. And I think I like Laquan Smith, and I like so much people who are still very much who make a point to me: Ralph Lauren, Tom Ford, Carolina Herrera. People who sustain themselves, their careers are long. Carolina Herrera, particularly, who just dressed Kamala Harris.
Wow.
And I feel that fashion today must be aligned to what is relevant in the world. I think that's what Vogue is trying to do. Fashion, it must be very aware of transgender, fluid, like they just did the cover of this man with the dress on. I don't know the man's name.
Harry Styles, yeah.
Harry Styles. When did you ever think you see a man on the cover of Vogue
with
a dress on? With a dress on.
Yeah.
It's 2020. You got to be, that's a part of the culture of Vogue now. Vogue in its moment of diversity has just embraced Lizzo and Harry Styles, gender fluid. You got to be aware of so many global moments. You have to be aware of the global moment of this great success that Joe Biden was elected president-elect. And that was a hard fought won battle. And I say we crossed the Red Sea after 4 years of angst and depression. We came through the Red Sea parted, and Joe Biden and Kamala Harris did it. We all worked hard. We voted and we won. Although some man thinks we didn't win, but you know.
All right, we won't get too far into that.
But I love that fashion today must have a slightly political bent.
Yeah.
I think
sorry, go ahead.
You go ahead.
That's right. So we have some questions, Andre, and I want to remind everyone, please, if you have any questions for Andre, just sort of hit the chat box. I'm going to read them. Our first one is from, of course, Laura Van Root Pool. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Laura.
We love you. So here's the question. Andre, your opinion of cultural appropriation in fashion. The Minister of Culture of Mexico today called out Isabel Marant and Carolina Herrera. But when you look back at some of Galliano and Saint Laurent's most revered collections, there are many elements that are culturally appropriated. I'd love to know what you think. So she's curious.
She must give me specifics of the elements of culturally appropriated. Give me specifics.
Well, she's saying, I guess with Isabel Marant and Carolina Herrera, Galliano. I mean, let's see, Saint Laurent. So I guess that, even with the Ballet Russe, maybe, or with there's culture, well, that's probably not.
Oh no, okay, okay, got it.
But yeah. So I mean, if they're taking
If you have a vision, and if you have a strong fashion collection, and if you decided to be inspired by the Ballet Russe, the important thing is that you have the great emotion in your work and your talent.
Yeah.
You have done it and you have researched it, and Saint Laurent researched it brilliantly and made it his own. He did not show Russian costume, ethnic costume. He showed his version of the romanticism of the literature of Russia and the history of Russia. Right. He was not showing peasant dresses in Russia. Maybe he was showing the way a modest woman would dress in Russia with a print dress and a scarf. He wasn't showing communists versus aristocrats.
Yeah.
John Galliano, you have to realize you have to separate. And this thing of appropriation for calling people out, people have just got to get over it and just give people some slack. Because this whole culture of just backlashing and beating people up for doing things can be so wrong, and people often miss the mark.
Yeah, okay. And our second question, yes. Well, Laura, just in response to, and I was curious about Galliano's geishas. That's what she's, sorry, the Ballet Russe.
Galliano's geishas.
But Galliano's geishas.
Whoever you are, man, listen to me. Whoever you are, first of all, Mr. Galliano went to Tokyo and researched it. He had books and volumes. He had photographs. He went to the temples. He went to the geishas. He did not appropriate the culture. He respected the culture. Right. He showed them as geishas, the fashion of a geisha is as significant as the Western fashion of a ball gown from a Dior 1952. So therefore, a geisha's kimono is as beautiful as that ball gown worn by Princess Margaret in 1948 or 52. And therefore, he brings it back to life in a modern way with respect. That's all I can say.
Great. Thank you. Our next question is from my friend, Ann Tarwater. And I'm so happy you're with us. She has two questions for you, Andre. Whatever happened to Romeo Jilly, and whatever happened to Michael Valbracht? So Romeo Jilly and Michael Valbracht.
Well, Romeo Jilly was a poet, and Romeo Jilly was a beautiful designer. I mean, some of the dresses were made probably with Venetian glass. I may be wrong, but it was extraordinary. But very often you could not wear the dresses.
Right.
I think he had a great career, but I don't know what happened to Romeo Jilly, but I can say what happened to Michael Valbracht. Valbracht was a fabulous artist. He retired. He lived in Florida. He died about 2 years ago. I think he had his moment. I think he had his moment in the sun, but I don't think he knew how to maintain it. But I don't think that he was a failure when he retired from fashion. I think that his moment was his moment. Everybody can have long careers,
That's a very hard
Some
thing.
people can, and some people can't.
Yeah.
Some people can be a Saint Laurent or Carolina Herrera or Ralph Lauren, and some people cannot.
Right, exactly. We have a question from Charlotte Wickham, and I want to hear about your Southern grandmother and what you learned from you. What did you learn from Binnie Francis?
Well, that's a great question. And I want to say, Charlotte, that I learned that politeness, be kind, that we were born in faith. My household was steeped in faith in the church. And we learned in the church as Christians that you must do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And when you're a Southern, you just have a different point of view about life. I became friends with Chandra Johnson before I met her, of Chandra and Jimmy, her beautiful daughters, Evie and Lydia, when she brought them to the museum to see the Oscar show. I think one of the daughters wanted to come home with me. She was so young, she said, I want to go home with him. And that was because they saw in me, children know. It was because I adored them, and they came to see this show in a private preview. And Chandra and Jimmy became friends of mine. And I really adore them, and I don't see enough of them. And it's something about being Southern. Jimmy is from the South. And I'm gonna tell you this, Julia Reed, who is one of the great friends that we met, I'm thinking of her lemon crabs meat soup today because I was reading her recipe online for lemon crab meat soup, and it just reminds me of Julia. Julia and I were close friends. Her father was Republican head of the GOP in Greenville, Mississippi. And it was like chalk and cheese, but we got on so well. And Julia and I bonded over fashion and couture. When she got married, I took her to Carolina Herrera and had a whole trousseau made. The entire wedding trousseau was made in couture. And then I went to a wedding in Greenville, Mississippi, and it was hot. It was hot. It was very hot. It was amazing. But Julia had great style from Mississippi. She had great style. Yeah. She knew fashion and she knew food. And from her love of food, and she learned how to cook. from her nanny and her mother's cook, and she created the legacy of cooking that she took over in Garden Gun. So I think that I learned from my grandmother: politeness, kindness, respect.
Wow, beautiful.
Manners will get you anywhere. Sit up straight.
Exactly. Are there any women sort of in the young generation today that you're really inspired by? Or there's the great swans of the past we know, but is there anybody right now?
Well, the swans of today are Rihanna. Listen to me. The swans of today are Rihanna,
Right.
Lizzo, Naomi, Megan Thee Stallion. Megan Thee Stallion. You would not expect that I would like her.
Right.
Megan Thee Stallion, Rihanna.
Yeah.
When she came up the steps of the Met with that yellow quote from Guy Powell,
Yeah,
that
sure.
yellow coat, oh, it was a princess. Beyonce, these are the young icons of today. Beyonce, Megan Thee Stallion, and Rihanna. Lady Gaga.
Yeah, Gaga's great.
Yeah, Lady Gaga, and a transgendered person. What's his name? Fox.
Okay.
What's his name? The one in the orange.
I'm not great with this stuff. But I'm sure maybe somebody in the audience knows. But I think we've just about hit 7 o'clock, Andre. So I think a full hour.
Can we have more questions? Do we have time?
Yeah, do we have some more questions? Anybody? Thoughts? Here we go.
I'm so happy. I'm going to thank you, Chandra, for doing this.
Oh, so here we have a question. Thank you. Andre, what is your message for young people who need inspiration in these challenging times? And now that you had such an amazing success as an author, would you ever entertain doing a book for young people? This is from Natalie Allen. Those are great.
I would love to do a children's book. That's the one thing I haven't done. I would love to be able to be successful and do a children's book. I would love to do a children's book. I would love to do a children's book for Lydia and Evie. I think that my advice to young people is never give up your dream and do your homework. I got ahead because I did my homework. When I went to interview Karl Lagerfeld, I didn't walk in and say, "Hello, Karl, how are you?"
Right.
I had read every article. We didn't have internet back then that I could read on Karl Lagerfeld. So when I asked the questions, he knew that I had been informed about who he was. And that's what impressed him. I didn't speak to Mrs. Reno. Well, Mrs. Reno, that's not a good idea. No.
Yeah.
I stood up and I listened and I did the assignment. And I hoped it would impress her what I did. And it did.
Yeah.
And then when she asked me a question, then I opened my mouth. So I think that young people must listen, observe, and by listening, you learn.
Yeah. And we have Emily's has a question kind of along those lines, which is, what's your advice to a young designer and somebody who's trying to build a career in fashion now? It's a very different time. You just keep trucking along. You never give up. You struggle. You will find a way. You keep showing. You knock on the doors. You don't give up. Just don't give up your dream. That's what I say to everyone, because I didn't give up mine. Right. And that's great. And Hillary, another question, which is, what exhibition have you still yet to curate? What do you want to do next? What's the next one?
I can't say, but it's going to be a good one. It's going to be mega and mammoth, and it's going to be couture, and it's going to be a blockbuster. I am working on it now.
Well,
I am working on it as we speak, and you will see some of the best clothes that you have ever seen that I couldn't believe that the lady kept the clothes. The clothes are intact. The clothes are, she bought couture and she stopped wearing couture at a certain point, but she kept all the clothes. And by the way, she gave all of them to the museum and she still had some in the closet.
Wow.
And some of the clothes she sent to one museum, they had an inventory of 600 items of things she had given to the museum, 600.
Amazing.
And still in her closet. And the Met has some and everybody has some. So I'm working on it and it's going to be a good one.
Are you going to write another book?
Yes, I have a book in mind, but it's going to be a slow burn. It's marinating on the thing, and it's a book about the women who have influenced me, the women that I have not spoken about in my last 2 books. And it will be Diane van Furstenberg, Sal Schlumberger, Alexis Thomas, my best friend, Janice Mays, my best friend from Brown, and Ann Bass, amongst others.
That's a book I want to read.
Yeah.
We have another question. Oh, here's an interesting one, right? Of the Times. This is from Ashley Mattel. How have you handled COVID, quarantine, the lockdown? How have you handled the lockdown?
I am so happy to be by myself. I can explain myself.
Right.
You give me a book, an Amazon box comes every day with a book in it.
Right.
All summer long, they were coming 2 and 3 and 4 boxes a day.
Yes.
Just sit on my porch, opening the boxes. I love books. If you got books, you can get by. Now, some days it's a challenge. When some days you feel a little bit of angst and you want to get out and crack, you want to get out of the house, but it has been a lockdown and I have been safe because I don't go out except for doctor's appointments. I had my hair cut once in August. I plan to have it cut on the 12th of December, the 1st of December. The man will come to me. Medical appointments, the food comes to me, and I'm not going anywhere Thanksgiving. I ordered my Thanksgiving dinner today because I will not be going to Thanksgiving dinners. I have an invitation, but they say you don't want to go to anyone's house, and it's too risky. But I am not bored. I am not bored. And The Crown, you're going to ask about The Crown. I watched The Crown on the first day. I binge watched from
Did you watch the whole season?
All day Sunday, 8 hours, 9 hours.
Oh my God. I was wondering, my wife and I started watching the first episode. And I was like, Andre's going to watch the whole season tonight.
In one day. I've always watched every season in one day. It's a Sunday. From season 1 through season 4, I always watch the whole damn thing. Then I go back and regroup. But I think that Olivia Colman is great.
It's amazing, right?
I think that what is showing in season 4 is that this is a normal family. They've got all kinds of issues like everybody's family has. It's the royals, but they've got the same kind of problems you have. Domestic, emotional, divorce, marriage, infidelity.
We have one more question from Sydney Echevarria, sort of back to what we were talking about before. What are you reading right now? I mean, you've had a lot of books coming. Are you reading a particular book right now?
Well, I'm reading, believe it or not, the last book that I got yesterday I've ordered Barack Obama's The Promised Land. I'm looking forward to that. I'm reading something that people may have read, The Kimmings of Monticello, the famous book about the national book, won the National Book Award. It's about Sally Hemings and her relationship to Thomas Jefferson and her decades of being his mistress, and how the link of all that is based. Monticello is based on the arms of the backs of slaves, and I have that I'm going to read. And I just ordered Joan Didion's book, The Year of Magical Thinking.
Right, amazing.
What I'm really looking forward to reading is Sheer Elegance, The Life of Kenneth, the hairdresser to Jackie Kennedy, Lucille Ball, Lee Radziwill, Brooke Astor, Katharine Graham.
Amazing.
And Marilyn Monroe, because he taught Marilyn how to bleach down there.
Wow. And on that note, that looks like we need to, I see Todd. Hi, Todd. I think we're going to wrap up, Andre.
Todd, is this fine? Are you all happy?
Todd, take over now.
This has been fabulous. I just wanted to come on just so that I wasn't sort of delayed if give the kind of final signing off.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But I did want to relay to both of you all of the very positive comments that have come along in the chat about how wonderful this whole experience has been, and that Andre, you are such a treasure, which is absolutely true. That's been repeated sort of many times here in the chat, and we need to have you back.
Yeah, we'll do it again with Ivan. Ivan, I thank you because your knowledge is with no parallel.
I'm not nearly.
No, you researched that picture of Anna in that lycée in that Jeffrey Bean dress. And let me just tell you one thing. I'm gonna give you a secret. I said, Anna, this is the dress you gotta wear to the party in Paris, with Paris. She wore it and she gave it to Fiona Darren. She took it off to Fiona Darren, the Paris editor.
Chef Fiona probably still has it.
But she just probably didn't want to hurt my feelings, so she wore the dress. It was not Anna Wintour's style, all buttoned up and long sleeves. She said, take that dress. I said, Fiona, what are you doing with that dress on your desk?
Todd, I think we need to set up another one of these. There's like about 20 more stories.
There is so much to talk about, and I did want to also say how much I really loved reading the book. When I knew that we had booked this, I went out and got the book right away and read it, and that, along with a conversation I had with Ivan, inspired me to then get Bill Cunningham's book.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Because I talked to Ivan about how so many of the photographs in your book, Andre, I noticed in the captions were taken by Bill Cunningham. So I was curious about what that relationship was and kind of why he seemed to be sort of at all these moments that you were bringing up in the book.
Bill Cunningham was everywhere in fashion. He was everywhere at every moment. Paris, New York, on the streets, at the parties, he was everywhere. He was a close friend. I only had one fight with Bill because he ran a portrait of me in the New York magazine, but that was only one, but he was a great man. He was everywhere. He was everywhere. He was on his bicycle, and in the collections in Paris, he'd be at a black tie event, and he would just say, hey, child, oh, Andre, look, you've risen to the top. And he was making fun of me. Oh, Andre, look at that coat, my God, aren't you doing well? And he was a great man. I think he was wonderful. And I love everything that's been written about him since he passed away.
Yeah.
And we know that he saved money. He had $4 million when he passed on.
Amazing.
He's got a niece who's got the whole legacy. He's got the whole estate of all the great photographs. It's just an amazing story. There have been documentaries on Bill Cunningham. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, the memoir was just really remarkable. And I didn't realize that he began as a milliner.
Yes. And he was in the army.
Yeah, exactly.
And he got weekend passes to go to the couture, right?
Exactly.
Yes. And he did great hats. He did great masks. I've seen masks he did for the black and white ball, for Truman's black and white ball there at FIT. He did the mask for all the ladies who went to the black and white ball. They're great masks. Isabella Urbanstead had them. And he had the knowledge. And also Bill's great gift was his knowledge of fashion. His knowledge of fashion, Worth, Poiret, Chanel. And in that memoir, he talks about having met these ladies in the couture, how he worked at Chez Ninon, remember?
Yeah.
He understood the moment of fashion is very important.
Yeah. And I think that is a takeaway from your book, Andre, from Bill's book, and every experience I've had with Ivan is something that you've commented on, Andre, is you have to do your homework.
Yes.
And that holds true for all three, Bill, you, and Ivan.
Yes.
Always do your homework and you know exactly what you're talking about.
Ivan has been a great editor too, Ivan, because didn't you edit that great book about houses in Vogue?
Around that time. Yeah, around that time, the horse book.
Yeah, we could do a story, we could do a talk on that, and then we could flip the switch. I could interview Ivan.
I would love it. I would be a little intimidated, but I would love it. I love talking about photography and horse and you knew Horst, right? Or you met Horst?
Oh, I loved Horst. Horst was great. Horst was very German, but very great. Horst also knew what he wanted. He did not suffer idiots.
Right.
And when you did a horse shoot, he did not suffer fools. Yeah,
he was.
Horst also was a great man, a great photographer.
Yeah. And
Horst had been a friend with Chanel.
Right.
And he went to Chanel's apartment. He said, "Oh, what a pretty screen. Oh, I like the screen. I like that screen. Oh, well." She sent the stuff, everything he picked, she sent it to him in a truck. Yeah. And it was in his house in Oyster Bay. Yeah. His whole house was full of gifts from Chanel.
Yeah.
Furniture, not porcelain.
Jean-Michel Franck.
Yes.
Pizzas.
Yes. Yeah. And he said he had bought the house from a Picasso. Didn't he buy the house from a Picasso?
No, he built the house. The funny story about the house, and so Horst P. Horst, photographer, built a house in Oyster Bay based on a house that was done in Africa by George Hoyningen Huna, who had been his partner and his mentor. The problem was, I guess, let's see if I can get this right. Horst designed the house because he was an architecture student. He had studied at the Bauhaus, so he understood design and architecture. He designed it, I think, in meters, and the architect read it as feet. So a whole house came out too small is the story. He got there and the whole house was too small because it's supposed to be 3 meters, but it was only 3 feet. And so it was great, but it was kind of an architectural disaster too. Everything was too small, but the house has been razed. Unfortunately, it's gone. And
it's gone?
Gone. Gert Elfring, who bought Horst Estate, the house had been knocked down and he sold it, I think, and it's gone, unfortunately.
How sad.
Yeah, but it was this wonderful house.
Beautiful park.
Hammamet was the place. So in Tunisia, in the 30s, everybody hung out in the summers. You went to Hammamet from Paris. I don't know I think I'm correct about this.
Yeah,
And so Huna had a house there. It was based on that house. It was a little smaller. And, but Horst just, he lived by the pictures in the house. You see all this Jean-Michel Franck furniture that was Coco Chanel's in the screen. The chinoiserie was all Coco Chanel's. He did the great portrait of Coco, and then this, I think, partly as a thank you for that as well. He got all the.
And then his next partner was Valentine Lawford, who did all the writings for the houses.
He wrote it.
Yeah, it's a great body of knowledge between the two of them. I thought it was
it's actually quite sort of sad and moving because the piece in my book, which was in the original book and the original Vogue story, Valentine writes about Horst's house, but it's actually the house that he lives in, but he can't say that in the magazine
because
so
gays
kind of tragic in movies writing about this house. It's his home, but he's talking about it as someone else's house. And so
those were the days then you couldn't say things like that.
You couldn't say things like that. So
he told me, I remember him telling me a story about, look, I think he put down in the house when he bought the land to buy this great house in Oyster Bay. He had a Picasso print, and I think he said if I had kept that print or painting, I could have been rich. But he instead sold their print to get the land to build the house.
Yeah, and there's the other great. Sorry, Todd, we're going on and on.
No,
But
no,
one
keep
more.
going,
The
keep
great. So the
going.
great. One of the most famous photographs in fashion history is the divers, which is the man and the woman who looks like they're on a diving board, done in Paris in 1930 for Vogue. We've probably, if you know fashion photography, you've seen it, or photographic history. And the story always was that Horst was the man in the photograph, and that George Huna, who was his partner, his mentor, his lover, photographed Horst and this woman in these eyes out Lacoste bathing suits. And first of all, everyone always thought it was on a diving board, but it was fact it was on the rooftop of the Paris Vogue studios. But there's actually, it's this great modernist piece. There's a sort of a controversy around it now, because we know from Horst's biography that he didn't arrive in Paris until the fall of 1930, but that picture was done during the spring of 1930, so they would not have known one another. So Horst throughout his life has said that was him, but the dates don't match. So we'll never know.
A boyfriend of Hunnigan Huning before, and Horst took umbrage. Horst took the credit.
Yeah, we just don't know. And we don't know who the guy is in the photo. Everyone's always said it's Horst, but we'll never know. So
Horst was great. It was a great privilege to know him too. He was a wonderful man of style.
Todd, I apologize to everyone. We're going into obviously a fashion photography vortex here.
That's okay. I know they love it.
It'll be an hour from now, and we'll still be talking. So people want to have dinner.
What is that man peeking behind? Who is that? That man peeking behind you? What is that?
Oh, this is Arthur Elgort, Christy Turlington, British Vogue. Wonderful.
Is that Christy Turlington in the grass?
Yeah, no.
Oh, in a car. In a car. Oh,
yeah, it's a little hard to see. Arthur was, my favorite.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Arthur's a great man. Arthur. A lot of pictures of Arthur Elgort in my book too, Todd.
Yeah.
I know, but it just seemed, I don't know, there was something about the Bill Cunningham photographs. They seemed to be a little bit more sort of captured behind the scene.
Yes.
Right? They were more kind of casual. You were just leaving somewhere, sort of caught unawares. Yeah. And it just piqued my interest so why is Bill Cunningham there at these moments?
Everywhere. He was everywhere. Veteran. He was like the circuit rider. He was in every important place of every important moment in fashion. Every place, on the New York streets, at the New York Society parties, at the Met balls, everywhere. At the Met Gala, he had carte blanche.
Yeah, I mean, he truly, and Andre, correct me. I mean, Bill truly lived it 24/7. I don't think we'll ever have anyone like that again. No. I mean, he just literally 24/7. I mean, when you see the film, he had boxes and a bed, and I don't even think he had a refrigerator.
In his studio, he slept on two cinder blocks with a bed between them or something. He slept on a Japanese mat. He didn't have any luxury. He went everywhere on his bicycle.
Yeah,
he would go to the Met on his bicycle and go back to the office on black tie to the Times to lay out his pictures.
It was all about the work.
I think one of the things that now here I'm contributing to this. So one of the things that I think surprised me about the memoir, and I think it's Fashion Climbing is the name of the book.
Yes.
Is it only deals with the part of his life when he was actually sort of participating in fashion, as it doesn't address the moments when he becomes a photographer.
Mm-hmm.
So it ends at the end of his kind of milliner career and that part of his life.
Well, that's because it was printed posthumously. It was after he died. He printed. This was a book he never published. He didn't like to talk about himself as a photographer. He didn't like to talk about himself.
And I don't think for Bill, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andre, but I don't think for Bill it was about the photography. It was about the fashion and about the people. That was just the tool. I don't think he really, he was a photographer. He was a great photographer, but it was about the clothes. It was about the women and about what was going on. He just was using that tool. So it was about the fashion.
He was one of the greatest men.
It wasn't about the photograph necessarily.
Yeah, there was a great line in there, and I think, Andre, you kind of touched on something similar and I'm not going to get it right, so this is sort of kind of what he was getting at, is what he was trying to figure out wasn't about the article of clothing itself. It was about why was it created and why did that person purchase it? Like what's the story behind its existence and its manufacture? Not the baubles on it or any of that. It's why did it come into existence? What's the story behind it?
He was great. He was great. And by the way, Mrs. Vreeland adored Bill Cunningham. Adored him. Yeah. As did Anna Winter and Annette de la Renta.
Anna as well. I mean,
Annette de la Renta society ladies adored him. They just loved him.
Yeah.
Brooke Astor, the late Brooke Astor adored him as well.
I mean, and that was what he was so special and unique. you know,
Yes.
and he was always himself, right, Andre? He
Always,
never
always.
tried to pretend to be anything other than exactly
Yes.
what he was. And it was all about the work. It was all about the fashion.
He was happy to photograph Mrs. Astor, Brooke Astor, the late Brooke Astor, as he was to photograph the drag queen in the Gay Pride Parade on Fifth Avenue on the Gay Pride Day.
Right.
He was as happy to capture people walking, slushing, jumping across the puddles of snow in puffer coats or fashion as he was to photograph that society lady in The Last Word from Paris.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing.
Okay,
All right.
I think we'll sum it up and let everyone go have a bite to eat.
Dinner, yeah.
You have
Not
it
a bite to eat, a whole lot of food.
Pizza's
What are you talking about, bite?
cooking right now. I can't wait.
Well, thank you, Ivan, and thank you, Todd.
Right
Thank you,
now.
Andre. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you,
Chandra,
Todd.
everybody.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
everybody. Bye, Evie. Bye, Evie, Lydia. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for
Bye,
joining
Jilly.
us.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Great evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre.
Thank you.